Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Today we got an influx of new content to go over, handful of Espers and Vision cards. So today we're going to focus primarily on the golden Ahriman. That's going to be a tongue twister the whole time. Vision card and Esper review, because when you do summon it, you get access to both, which quite honestly is really valuable premium in this game. Both Espers and Vision cards have massive balance ramifications when it comes to how you set up your teams, both for any and all content. Getting into the Vision card itself, my opinions on it, I'll talk about the Esper in just a couple minutes here. If we're talking about what it actually does, about 400 HP, rounding up, 130 attack, gives you 3 defense, also gives you a little bit more bulk, it gives you 20% HP, but also gives you 10% attack and 10% unit resistance also, all for just one person, so whoever you equip it on. In terms of the party, you get a 20% buff to your magic resistance, 25% attack, and 35% dexterity, which, friendly reminder, affects both your accuracy and your critical hit rate. So when we look at what this brings to the table, primarily as it pertains to who you'd equip it on and what the other Vision cards have to offer, it's immediately clear to me that this is a very obvious Joom synergy, where it gives her the extra 20% HP. It will also give her upwards of 35% unit resistance when she uses her own ability, attack ability, that gives her that buff. But theoretically, there are also 2 external party buffs, where New Test Subjects has 12% unit resistance, or the Tifa card has 20% unit resistance, which will stack with this 10% as well as the 25% from her abilities. So when you're talking about, setting up Joom as the kind of tank that can get into some advantageous duels, that's one of the bright spots of the wind cast potentially. This actually is a good card in that it helps buff that unit resistance. It might be a little imbalanced that she doesn't have any area resistance, but that's quite okay. There's other sources of that in the game. Other things that I'm looking at here, the magic resistance makes her a positive 15%. She starts off with a minus 5%. It's one of the few starting weaknesses that she really has. So the fact that this card will give her that buff to 15%, although we may not be in a strict magic user meta at the moment, where things are more, magic attacks that scale off slash and missile and whatnot, magic is still a really powerful attack type in the game that obviously can be exploited when Joom is not built properly for. So this card does a really good job hedging that weakness for her and her party members, obviously, overall. The dexterity buff, though, does also go well with some of the critical cards that exist for the wind units. Gift Like No Other is technically a 13% buff to critical rate, which will stack with the crit rate fallout of what you get with higher dexterity, but the Near Vision card also has 25% crit damage up. So extra dexterity means more times your critical hitting, which means more DPS overall, because you're going to get extra damage with the crit modifier up. So I see this, working synergistically with either or both of those really well. The dexterity buff also goes well, as I mentioned, for accuracy, where the Typhon Vision card, which is a magic-oriented card, might put it on your Halloween Leela or your Varush if you have them. It's a 15% buff to accuracy, which does stack with the accuracy that you get from the extra dexterity. So I do see some natural synergies there. That being said, I also see some overlap where, obviously, it might be a little redundant with some of the other Vision cards for the unit resistance, but the attack stat in particular, too, attack 25%, semi-redundant, where if you look at Gift Like No Other that we just mentioned, they give a 50% buff to attack on that card. So when you're talking about using both of these cards at the same time, although they do technically stack on crit rate with the dexterity and the actual rate itself, the attack will not stack. So you'll get the 50%, and the 25% on this card is essentially useless. So not a bad card by any means. I don't think it's the best card. I don't think it's a must-have. It's obviously tailor-made for maybe some more specific matchups and balance things where you really need more of that magic resistance overall. I don't think we're there currently in the state of the game, but definitely something that you need to be ready for it at a moment's notice with how this game works. If we're looking at the Esper, so first thing that I'm looking at here is the statistics of our Esper. Definitely on the lower side here of 13 agility. That's quite okay, though. There's not a lot of tank-oriented Espers that come with high agility. I think Odin is kind of the exception at the moment, where people tend to be stacking him with the slash resistance and missile resistance to put on the tank. But by and large, the rest of them, when you look at Golem and Phoenix and Death Machine and Freeze, is the magic-oriented card that gives you spirit, little on the slower end of things. So this is kind of right in line. Does have a good amount of HP. I think one really valuable thing on this card is, or on this Esper, is a 25% resistance to stun. That's what this is. That not a lot of stun resistances in the game. Obviously, there's a couple items that give some temporary resistance, but this is a nice niche thing to have on an Esper where you're going to appreciate it when you really need it. Only 5% weak to ice, and when we're talking about the skill, although these don't get used very often in battles, battles tend to be over before you can summon an Esper, this is quite the handy Esper skill. Not only do you have 25% chance to inflict Petrify on a target, but you also have near guaranteed chances to inflict Blind and Silence, which, again, when you're talking about the Wind cast, it's can be an evasive-oriented comp with Tifa 2B and Leela potentially, maybe not so much nowadays. Blind is a really important status effect where obviously they're not have a vastly reduced chance of hitting your evasion units, but then Silence, kind of that same idea where she is inherently a little weak to magic, that if you can silence someone, you immediately take out that innate weakness or threat that June would normally have. The rest of it pretty standard, what you see for imperils, to enemies and the buffs that you get to yourself. Overall, great ability. I have nothing else to say on that. When we're looking at the Esper board, though, this is a very unique Esper board, potentially. And when you're looking at all the options of how you can build it, first thing that stuck out to me is there is no evocation damage nodes, which tends to be the top nodes here on almost all, the majority of the Espers. But instead, they've actually given some variety to what you can put on here. So you can have upward of 25 wind attack, 15 defense, 22% critical evasion rate, 25% slash resistance, that's really important, 20% to your critical rate, 15% to earth killer, which wind naturally counters anyway, but nice to have that a little bit extra. 25% ice resistance, I think, is really interesting, where obviously you would try to use wind units in an ice meta, that's disadvantageous, but given that it's only minus 5% on the Esper, you essentially come out net positive of 20% ice resistance, which does help theoretically if you are putting June in that situation. Not recommended, but that's a nice option. 7% accuracy and then 5% HP as well, so a lot of variety here in terms of how you want to build it. I really do think you can either go all in on the tankier build, but one thing I've learned looking at June so far is that she does seem to be poised to be a very good damage dealer as well, where she, although she does have some great stats to take a bunch of hits, she also has a lot of things that make her a violently hard damage dealer for a tank as it pertains to the unit resistance and peril that she can give to an enemy. Her limit break is a 35% slash attack up modifier. She has a buff that gives defense penetration, kind of odd to have it on a tank, so you can kind of go either way at the flexibility of this board. If you're going for the tankier variation, you're going to load as much as you can into either the slash resistance or the defense, so you can go either 25% slash resistance and 10 defense, or go the 15 defense and 18 slash resist. Either way, it depends on what you want, but also the heavy emphasis on 22% critical evasion, where you're just not going to be able to burst her down as quickly if she's getting not getting critically hit, and then the 7% accuracy just to ensure that she's doing some proper chip damage. But I do think there's a more offensive version, and I don't even mean that word offensive, because there is some nice trade-offs that if you instead invest in, at minimum, the wind attack here and the crit rate up, so that she obviously gets the wind attack up and will crit rate harder, which will help if you're doing the crit damage up with the near automata card. But you still have a lot of flexibility to give her some of the tankier options, where you could still invest in either 10 defense and 5% HP, or you could invest in the 16% crit evasion and the 5% HP, or a little bit of 7% slash resistance. So you can still build this like full offensive and still get some really good tankier options to throw on her that are going to make her kind of do both. So I actually think some variation of this is probably the more recommended build of it. And then it goes without saying, because I haven't said it yet, but we really are looking at what this Esper has to offer. I am thinking about it in the context of June, but hypothetically, definitely a great DPS potential Esper as well, where any DPS would appreciate the 25 wind attack. You're going to make them bulkier with the potential defense or the slash resistance. The crit rate's going to go really well for them. The accuracy and the HP are going to bulk them up and make sure they hit things more often. This is still a great card for really any wind unit physical attacker. Obviously, maybe not so much when you're talking about 2B and Tifa, where the orientation tends to be more evasion, so you want the Tetra or the Demon Shimmer, but there's definitely some other wind DPS, like Luartha or Korowell, that you want to put it on. It is a definite improvement from what you probably would put on them normally, so still a thumbs up. But that's Golden Ahriman in a nutshell. I do think this is a valuable addition to the game. I don't think it's a must-pull by any means. Even if you have June, I do think there's enough that exists currently that still makes her a strong character, and this just makes her strong for a different set of reasons. I can't say how impactful it is, because again, we're not in that current meta and things have yet to unfold, but definitely a thumbs up for me in terms of adding something kind of new to the game to tweak the balance of what you can use on the wind comp. So that's things in a nutshell. Hopefully this is insightful and informative, and I'll talk to you all soon.